welcome to Varn Blog Solo. Today, I wanted to talk about the seeming proliferation of Marxist anti-Marxism, communist anti-communism. These paradoxes are not dialectical, whatever you may mean by that. There is no emergence and response. Instead, they are the results, and the particularly self-dishonest results, of gusts of popular sentiment, which is dialectical. The thing breeds its negation, since it cannot come about. And we don't just mean communism here, or socialism, or even the DSA's anemic, quasi-programmatic calls for Medicare for all, free college, and I suppose the Green New Deal. There's been a fundamental refusal to define virtues, and instead what we have is moralizing. And in that moralizing, which tends to be just emotivism, people drift with the two popular tendencies. They tail them and flip one way or the other like fish. They also tend to expect that anyone who is not telling them exactly how to live their lives is drifting them. Of course, this is usually the opposite of the truth. It is not a grift to tell you what people are doing and what they are capable of doing. Now, I do not see myself primarily as an entertainer, nor am I here to just tell jokes. I am not Trapo Trap House and never have been. I'm an educator. I'm a polemicist. I may be an agitator. And in other things, I have been an activist and a leader, but those are separate things. It is a motive, almost purely a motive, to assume that the person who teaches you how to think should be the one who leads your political movement. For the most part, in the left and in the right, this has been a disaster. Not a disaster for the people involved, after all, it keeps an entire media industry afloat, but a disaster for building any substantive politics that could be coherent beyond an election cycle. I've already talked about how social conservatism is predictable in a liberal administration. I should also perhaps talk about Marxists accommodating to themselves to that administration as a form of coping, while it should be more ill-advised, is nothing new. There's a long history of it. All one has to do is look at the history of the Mitterrand government and the French Communist Party's relationship to it to see the problems. A political movement has to be fluid, but needs to have coherent orientations. There will be disagreement in the movement. People tend to circle the wagons and try to expose people or go on, quote, witch hunts when people are losing a coherent identity or when they are under threat. It is not a sign of strength. It is a sign of weakness or incohesion. And functionally, those are the same thing, even though what brings them about is often quite different. Furthermore, it is important to remember that politics that are not embodied are like morality that is not embodied. It is easily manipulated. People form parasocial attachments to media figures because they know how to manipulate their emotive calls. There is no community embodied in that, no class relations unsubsumed in that. Lester McIntyre's After Virtue is instructive here. He claims, and I think actually somewhat accurately, the two tendencies of the European and post-European Enlightenment, by post-European we mean those societies that have emerged in the settler colonial context, such as Latin America, Anglo-North America, etc., they have tried to come up with a coherent singular rule divorced from context, from history, from, dare I say, tradition, even, from anything meaningful that creates a politics, and divorced, from the Marxist perspective, from class, from conceptions of liberation and conceptions of justice. The two main rules, and both of them are at the heart of liberal morality, because they are at the heart of the Enlightenment and the post-capitalist justification of the rationalizing project of capitalist society, where Kant's deontological imperative, with its categorical imperative, the ability to say that all morality can be adjudicated by making it a universal law. Now, the fact that if you try to do this, you end up in incoherence very quickly, should surprise no one. But utilitarianism is a more popular one, seemingly consequentialist, but based on simple rules, even though in its own day and in its own instantiation, J.S. Mill and other later utilitarians had to even supplement utilitarianism with virtue ethics to make it work. The utilitarian says that you should act in the benefit of all other beings, and the greatest benefit of beings is how you should act. You should always be maximizing the utility for everyone else. Now, depending on how much you weigh a negative versus a positive, you can easily become an anti-natalist or even an anti-lifist. David Benatar kind of illustrates this point, and he does so without irony. But who you include in the calculation and what you include as utility is never settled, nor can it be. As Marx commented about Bentham imagined the world as a bunch of pudgy Englishmen, i.e., the utility was the utility of imagining everyone else as yourself. Even the ethical appeals of a progressive like John Rawls end up reduced to this imagination of yourself as a universally decontextualized person, and thus fairness can be invoked. And in fact, Rawls's innovation is that he combines utilitarianism and Kantian deontological ethics. The problems with this are myriad. And McIntyre isn't wrong to point out that what it tends to lead to is mere emotivism, or as I like to call it, gust of popular sentiment. And this is true in politics, as political morality has replaced people's personal morality, since people have been equating the personal with political for now 4 or 5 decades. And while there may have been a good reason for that slogan to emerge, the unethical and immoral behavior often of left-wing leadership towards their wives while they were being theoretically feminist in public, the reality of the fact is that to make the personal the political actually does the reverse. It makes the political personal sentimentalism. Combine that with a feeling of constant seizure, and no wonder people rely on parasocial relations to get them out, because they have abdicated their own community and any responsibility to it for an abstract one. class consciousness has to be rooted in class existence. And while anyone can throw their lot in with a class other than their own, it is even that is generally rooted in seeing one's future, one's common lot with that class. Now, I tie these two things together. Marxism does not make moral claims, and in fact, I will go so far as while there are moral implications in Marxist theory, some of which I think it is unwise to try to pretend aren't there, that exploitation is wrong, etc. The point that Marx is trying to make, and Capital in particular, is that the normative claim can be deduced from the descriptive. Now, anyone who knows it, most logic is told don't do that. That's a naturalistic fallacy. But Marx is trying to argue that it's not just that capitalism is wrong because it's mean or greedy, but that its fundamental orientation is unstable, and it will necessarily lead to something else. Hopefully that necessity is socialism, although Marx is not entirely clear on that, as barbarism is often stated as the alternative. Now, that phraseology is not particularly from Marx, but it's not something that isn't implied by his own writing. But morality is still important. So why is the moralizing left so annoying? Because it is caught up in the identification of itself with fads about itself. And thus, no matter how much utilitarian or deontological or justice, social justice being even vaguer than either, is posited without a definition of what that justice is, what we are left with is mere emotivism, the fads of the day, and that will pulse breed on both marketing and who's in power. Because who's in power reflects yourself back at you, and often you do not like what you see. This was not a point I got into exactly in my we should expect social conservatism to be on the rise during a liberal administration. But let's be honest, it's at play. When the progressive sees that their allegiance with the Democrats has led to nothing, what do they say to themselves? Usually there are two options. If you want to feel safe, you will go to the pseudo community. And I call it a pseudo community because these identifications are not particularly embodied. It does not take much to be a Republican or a Democrat. It is about consumption choices. It is not a community of which you partake. Now, it used to be that these Republican and Democrat nomenclatures was based on communities of which you were in, but now it's basically regions and broad spectrum things in your age. And the regions tend to be tied to it off of pure economic calculus. Cities tend to be financialized. Rural areas tend to need lots of physical capital. The petty bourgeois really don't have the money for increased taxes. The big bourgeoisie don't care. A political movement, worth its salt, does not confuse roles. It realizes that there will be differences, factions, and differences of value. But it can hold itself together by maintaining a minimum standard and an orientation towards something. Liberal politics, or conservative politics, has an easy orientation as the things they are preserving already exist. They don't need ideological cohesiveness. They don't even need strong orientations, but the people who empower them need justifications, of which vague orientations often help. but they're fluid and they don't mean much. Thus, without a strong separate identity, both personally and as a group that is embodied in things that you do, you cannot really meaningfully resist a lot of this stuff. You can go on from one moral panic to another, and that moral panic will be given to you by some media figure with more budget than me. Some petty millionaire. Some cable news jockey. Some podcast host with a corporation looming behind them. And it will give you a feeling of community. And you might even get some parts of it. But I doubt you're playing football or bowling with a team. Now, people get mad and call me a grifter. They call a lot of left media figures grifters, and some of them are. I mean, that's real enough. And some of the left media figures are just stupid. That's real enough too. But I want to ask you, what can I do for you politically? Not what can I tell you to do, not what guidance can I give you, of which your local conditions are something you know better than me. I can give you some help on orientations. That's what this show is about. I can give you history. But you know your local conditions better than some rando podcaster. So why do you come here for that? Is it not a kind of emotivism? And yes, before people start commenting in the YouTube comments that, oh, but you can't separate morality and rationality from emotion. They all have cognitive content, my friend. I know that. And in some ways, what we mean by emotivism is not just separating your emotion from your intellect. That's not totally possible. And that itself is an Enlightenment delusion, which has led to emotivism being the dominant form. It is almost dialectical, as if overfocus on rationality as an independent thing leads to actually its opposite, a morality based on the emotions of whatever is popular at the time, because it approximates something like an embodied community, even if that embodied community does not actually exist. What does that mean for you? I can't tell you that. When someone asks me how a system should work, I can give them some guidelines for how to check to see if a system should work. But if someone asks me how to make something happen, I always say, well, ask the people who do it and have them skill you. If someone wants to learn how to succeed in a business or succeed in politics, one needs a mentor, and preferably many of them, and better off if it's a group. Come now. Let's be serious for a minute. Is why you're mad at the podcasters is a bit of self-reflection? Are you mad at your own lack of political power? Are you mad that some of them told you that they could give you an answer, and yet very little's changed? Even if you feel comforted on your weird political group on Twitter, or in your Tyner factionism within some kind of organization that is also increasingly irrelevant, does it make you feel special? Does it make you feel like you have something? Does it end your loneliness? Ask yourself that. You see, the answer to emotivism isn't blind rationalism. Such a thing probably isn't possible. I've hung out in less wrong forums. I know how that tends to go. It's training your emotions and using your emotions to hone your intellect. Left media necessarily follows where the money goes. If some of them tell you they're just entertainers while they're doing that, you can be mad at them for having brought up politics in the first place, but you should probably be thankful that they're being honest, as opposed to streamers who try to convince you that contributing to their stream is the movement. That another quasi-Bonapartist campaign, which has no chance of succeeding, is the movement. That cheerleading unions while not dealing in them or with their problems is the movement. Do you know how many people have lectured me about what I should do in a union who are unemployed? Now, I think there should be rights for the unemployed. I don't think that makes you an invalid person. But it is weird to get that kind of feedback. Someone yelling at you about what you need to do when they are not in the position to do it at all and never have been. The irony of this moment is that it does generate a lot of communisms and Marxisms that are incoherent. But let's be honest, the response to Occupy's localism, provisionalism, self-justification, actionism, whatever you want to call it, was a turn to the DSA. And that grew dramatically, not just because of the response to Occupy's failure, something that I predicted in 2011, by the way, but that itself was to recapitulate a strategy that had been tried before. Just like Occupy seemed to remind us of a lot of the wilder parts of the anarchist end of the New Left, the party end of that, and the DSA reminded us of what happened with the end of the SPA, with all these Communist Party USA people becoming, well, more and more wedded to the Democrats. The siren song is there. It takes more than mere emotions, mere identity, mere self-conception to resist it. But if you do have a self-conception, you better be independently oriented and based on the actual experiences of where you see yourself and your common future. In short, skin in the game generates your virtues. Political morality is the gust of your vague hopes. Thank you, and have a good day.